why having a sound strategy is fundamental to having a resilient organisation. And we're going to look at the intersection between resilience, strategy, and how we manage our risks and our opportunities. So my name is Costa Nicolaou, and I'd like to thank you all for attending today's session. I really hope the next 90 minutes is going to be thought-provoking and give you an opportunity to have good conversations with people of a like mind and provide you the opportunity to take some great ideas away from this session. So a bit about myself. I come from a tech background focused on governance, risk and compliance. And a few years ago, I set out on a journey to understand, I guess, the priority that organizations place on their strategy. And I had a bit of an inflection point in my research. And many years before that, I was a firm believer that our organizational resilience was mostly influenced by how well we manage our risks and our issues and our opportunities. But the inflection point was that there was a missing cog, well, a cog that I was missing all along my journey. And that cog was strategy. Now, sure, risks and opportunities, they're there and we need to manage them correctly. However, it's our strategic response to those things that will really determine our outcomes. I'm going to pass you over to my co-presenter today, Pete Jevasani, who will introduce himself and then kick off today's agenda. Pete, over to you, mate.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Costa. Well, welcome, everybody. It is fantastic to have you all join us this afternoon. A good opportunity for everyone to share their insights. We're actually going to get you to do something called participation. We will invite you to participate in today's masterclass with us, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Look, a little bit about myself. I've worked in risk-related roles for the past 15 years, but really I've specialised in organisational resilience for the past 10 years in my professional and consulting life as well. So I've specialised in areas of local, state and federal government with a key focus on building enterprise-wide risk approaches and, of course, organisational resilience frameworks. Now, the term resilience has really evolved over the past decade. And I think even more so in the last 12 months, as we've seen organisations having acknowledged that resilience needs to become a strategic priority. Now, one way to influence resilience and ensuring that it does become that strategic priority is through international standards. Now, I've been working with the International Standards Organisation for the past 6 years, specifically with a technical committee focusing on security and resilience. Back in 2015, I contributed to the first international standard on resilience, which is, if you've got a pen, you want to write this down, ISO 22316. And it was a focus on resilience principles and attributes. And throughout the first part of today's session, I'm going to actually introduce you to those principles as part of today's masterclass. More recently, last year, I was the convener of a new international study group on organisational resilience, mainly with the core focus of what are some new areas of standardisation for resilience. And what we came out with after a year program of international experts was we identified a real need and requirement for an ISO standard that focused on resilience policy formulation and strategy implementation. And today I'm going to give you a first look at a framework around how you can enhance resilience within your organisations with a key focus on strategy. So for me, what this highlights is a need for organisations to ensure successful strategy design and execution. And today I'm going to talk to you about strategy, but a focus on organisational resilience. But Costa is going to provide you some really keen insights and also some practical things that you can apply within your own organisations. And hopefully you'll take away some key concepts that you can apply in your own organisations as well. So we're going to look at today's agenda, what we will focus on in our session. Thank you, Costa. Here we go. So our key focus areas, I'm going to provide an intro into organisational resilience. We're going to look at how strategic alignment helps us enhance organisational resilience, how to bridge the gap between strategy design and its operationalization, and also look at why an agile strategy is fundamental to sustained resilience. Now, we've got plenty of opportunity for questions. So if you do have a question as Costa or myself are talking, feel free to come off mute and ask the question. You can use the chat function. We'll be monitoring that throughout today's session as well. Or at the conclusion of today's masterclass, we'll have plenty of opportunity for those that want to stay back and ask any questions of Costa and myself. Now, as I mentioned at the start, we will encourage participation. And a good way that we want you to participate is by using the concept of a think room. And the think room is really an opportunity for you to go in and have a discussion with your peers about some questions that we'll put to you throughout today's session as well. And how we're going to do this, we're going to start each think room with a poll. And what we'd like you to do is answer a couple of questions. And then when you go into your think room, just have a discussion with your peers. So let's start with our first poll of today. So I'm going to launch it now on your screen. It should pop up for you. And I'm just going to pause for a moment. I'm going to put a little bit of music on and give you a moment to respond to our first poll. Okay, it's another 20 seconds. Okay. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 3 seconds. I was sharing a story at the start of today. I had played that song this morning in another workshop, and this woman's banging her head up, dancing around. It was fantastic to watch until she realized that her camera was on. Okay, let's have a look at the first poll results. Okay, so does your organization have a formal process for developing and reviewing its strategy and execution plans? 71% of you said yes, 21% said no, and one of you said I'm unsure, which is fine. Does your organization maintain a clear and proactive strategic direction as opposed to one that is reactive to short-term distractions? Most of you said yes, a few of you said no. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to open up our first think room. You'll get a pop-up on your screen to join a room, and we just want you for the next 7 minutes, introduce yourself to each other and just have a conversation about these couple of questions that are on your screen now. Hopefully you've had a great conversation in your first think room. It's the first of 4 today, so it's a really good opportunity to leverage off your other peers in the conversation on resilience and of course strategy. Now, organizational resilience, it's the ability of an organization to absorb and adapt in a changing environment that enables it to deliver its objectives and of course to survive and prosper. More resilient organizations can anticipate and respond to threats and opportunities arising from sudden or gradual changes in their internal or external context and environment. Enhancing resilience more than ever needs to be a strategic organizational goal. The delivery of your strategy is a critical attribute for a resilient organization. Resilience is also the outcome of really good business practice and, of course, effectively managing risk. An organization's resilience is influenced by a unique interaction and combination of strategic and operational factors. Organizations can only be more or less resilient. And believe it or not, there's no absolute measure or definitive goal, because once you reach a goal that you're aspiring for as an organization, you want to go further. There's a sweet spot for resilience, and I call it around that evolution part, and I'll talk about that in a couple of moments' time. An organization needs to be committed to enhancing their resilience as it contributes to an improved ability to anticipate and address risks and vulnerabilities. It increases coordination and integration of management disciplines to improve coherence and performance. And I'll talk about what some of those management disciplines are, and provides a greater understanding of its dependencies that support its strategic goals and objectives. There's no one single approach to enhance an organization's resilience. There's some established management disciplines like risk management, business continuity, crisis management, financial management that contribute towards resilience, but on their own, these disciplines are insufficient to safeguard an organization's resilience. Instead, organization resilience is the result of an interaction of key attributes and activities that contribute from many different technical and scientific areas within your organizations. And these are influenced by the way in which uncertainty is addressed, decisions are made, and how people work together. I'm going to focus on some key principles. Can we just go back a slide, please, Costa? I want to focus on some key principles of a resilient organization. And the principles provide a foundation upon which a framework and strategy to achieve an enhanced state of organizational resilience can be developed, implemented, and evaluated. Now, these principles were founded in the International Standard 22316. And it talks to an organization's resilience is enhanced when behaviors and values are aligned with a shared vision and purpose, which provides you clarity on what are we trying to achieve as an organization and where do we want to go. It relies upon an effective strategy design and execution. So this helps move the organization forward to their desired state. What is it? Where is it that we want to go, and how do we plan to get there? And that's certainly what Costa will step you through today, is a couple of different approaches to achieving that. Your resilience relies upon an up-to-date understanding of your context. And that's both the internal context of your organization and externally. Your ability to absorb, adapt, and effectively respond to change. Now, that could be incremental or sudden change. And we've certainly seen organizations adapt very quickly over the last 12 months. It relies upon good governance and management. So having structures and processes in place to help enable you to deliver your strategy. It's supported by a diversity of skills, leadership, knowledge, and experience, and is enhanced by a coordination of across management disciplines and contributions from technical experts. And finally, certainly relies upon your ability to effectively manage risk. So we're going to take those key principles and apply them in a policy formulation and strategy implementation perspective. So if we can go to the next slide now, Costa. Okay, so we've broken this down into guiding principles and enabling principles. And you'll see there from a policy and strategy implementation side, really core is that shared vision and purpose. So where is it that we're going to, and why do we want to do it? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? Again, having that understanding of our context. A good understanding of what obligations do we need to consider. They could be legislative, regulatory obligations, or they could also be from a legal and social perspective. Let's move into strategy implementation. We have to build that capacity to be able to absorb and adapt to change within our organization. We need to effectively manage risk, of course. But importantly, we need to have the flexibility, the agility, and the adaptability so we can pivot where we need to. When sudden things happen to us, we need to be able to adapt very, very quickly. I won't go into too much detail on the enabling principles, but the one I do really want to call out is that coordination across management disciplines. So again, you heard me talk about some of those management disciplines: risk management, business continuity, crisis management, emergency management, and the like. Now, you might have heard the term Chief Resilience Officer. That could be one strategic role you could have within your organization. It could be a resilience practitioner. So almost not a specialist, but a generalist, someone that is a jack of all trades, that has a bit of knowledge about everything, but can communicate and engage with those key people that drive and deliver those key functions within your organization. The other one that really stands out for me here is, of course, organizational culture. Really important that there is a focus on the values and the behaviors that you need to actually enable you to deliver your strategy. So really important that you have a strong focus on those key principles. Now, this this diagram has been now will be adapted into a new ISO standard. So over the next 2 years, I'm leading a project where we're going to take these key principles and we're going to have a focus on incorporating the attributes of a resilient organisation that have been identified in ISO 22316. And we're going to write a brand new standard to assist your organisations in applying this to enable you to develop a resilience policy and also to then develop a strategy for implementation. So, you know, over the coming 12 months, you'll see some posts on LinkedIn where we'll be updating the strategy and the resilience community on what's happening in that space. Thanks, Costa. So how does strategic alignment help us enhance our organisational resilience? So we're going to take a look at another perspective of a resilient organisation. This is something I developed a couple of years ago around what I thought were the 4 key components of a resilient organisation. And it really came down to 4 things: innovation, strategy, operational plans, and management disciplines. And I'll explain why that is. So we think about organisations that are successful. What do they have? They have, you know, creative, innovative people within their organisations. But can you be innovative just on creativity? No. You need to convert that into action. So you come up with your ideas. You look at what it is that we want to either develop new or we want to enhance within our organisations. And the way that we can start to deliver against or some of these innovations is, of course, incorporate that into our strategy. So, you know, again, brings it back to having a shared vision, mission, having core values across our organisation, a culture supportive to deliver against our strategy, having clear strategic objectives that we want to deliver, really good governance around decision making within our organisation, and of course, an understanding of your context in which you operate. Once you have your strategy, what do you need to do with it? You need to execute it. And the best way to execute a strategy is, of course, through our operational plans. So having some a clear line of sight between the multiple operational plans that you would need in your organisation to deliver against that strategy. And I can assure you, with most organisations I've worked with in the past, is they lose that visibility. You know, and sometimes we have multiple strategies that we're delivering. If you work in a local state government context or in education, so, you know, large universities, you're trying to manage all these strategies that have all these operational plans that sit underneath them, and you've got no line of sight. Most of you, and I can probably hazard a guess, that most of you are relying on Excel spreadsheets to communicate information across your organisation. Then we look at these management disciplines. So as I've mentioned, you know, cybersecurity, risk management, crisis management, facilities management, all the managements. We look at these management disciplines and it's like, well, how do I ensure that this will enable me to deliver against my operational plans and, of course, against my strategy? And then the final component that I like to focus on here is around our people. So what information and knowledge do we need to ensure successful delivery of strategy? How do we build in continual improvement in our approach to delivering our key strategies for our organisation? Sound leadership, in fact, I call it empowered leadership. So empower people, let them make decisions, set the parameters for decision making within your organisation, and to go ahead, go and do it. And then agility is really core for an organisation. And look, I'm preaching to the choir now. I am assured because we've all lived through it. For the first time, for a lot of us in our working life, we've had to be agile. Sometimes by choice, other times by necessity. And I'll just quickly touch on that evolve. Evolve, I call it. If I had my whiteboard up here, I'd be drawing on a straight line and then bang, this line will go into the stratosphere. That's where the sweet spot of resilience sits. So where we've lived through something, we've experienced it, we've tasted it, then we incorporate that back into our lessons learned, and then we incorporate that back into our operational planning. It impacts on what we do with our strategy, and what happens? We start to evolve as an organisation. And that is that sweet spot of a resilient organisation, is when you start to learn from what you're doing and incorporate into business as usual, and you evolve into something new. Now we're going to just quickly have a look at some examples of a couple of organisations. And I'll just pause for the moment, and I'll give you an opportunity to read that first one to the left, Kodak. So just read the first mission statement up the top. Now, to be honest with you, I had to abbreviate the mission statement because it was so long. It had to be edited down. But essentially, so if we look at Kodak, now Kodak, I think, is certainly an organisation that we use as an example of where it just went wrong. So what happened? Kodak actually, they invented the technology for the digital camera way back in 1975. In 1981, they asked one of their internal teams to actually do some evaluation on the current market and trying to predict what was going to happen into the future. So in 1981, they predicted the rise of digital photography and the end of consumables like print paper. But did the board listen? No. They failed to adapt to a changing environment, so they ignored what was happening around them. So Fuji films were skyrocketing in sales of digital cameras, and they just failed to adapt their strategy and continue to invest in traditional film cameras well up until 2004. Can anyone tell me what happened in 2007? They went bankrupt. They just crashed. They're making a comeback now, and guess what they're investing in today's market? They're going into pharmaceuticals. So they've diversified, completely diversified. But on the other hand, let's look at Netflix. So Netflix, they disrupted the industry. In fact, they disrupted their own industry where they moved from mail order DVDs, which was a new innovation itself, to online streaming. Now, the really cool thing about Netflix is that when they were developing their platform, they had two teams working. One team was developing the platform. The other team were in the back trying to hack the system. They wanted it to fail, and their core mission was, we want this system to fail. This other team's going, I don't know what's going on here. We're doing all this coding and someone keeps hacking us. What's going on? Do you know when those two teams met? The day that Netflix was launched as an online streaming product. So it was a really good, innovative way to make sure they built the most secure system that they could. So their ability to adapt to changing technologies and consumer demands was a key success point. Their flexibility. So they let the customer choose. You know, it was customer led. What do you want to watch and when do you want to watch it? So they're not trying to, they're giving you choice more than anything else. They invested in original content, and they've invested hundreds of $millions into this space. And they live by their business strategy of adapt, adopt, and innovation. Thanks, Costa. Okay, so this brings us to our think room number 2. I'm just going to launch the poll again and give you all a moment to cast your vote. So I'm launching the poll now. And I'll give you 45 seconds for that. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling now. Last chance. Good to see a few heads bopping around there to the music, which is great to see. Okay, so I'm ending the polling now, and let's have a look at some results. So, does your organisation continually monitor the external and internal environment? That's great. 71% of you said yes. Fantastic to see. Does your organisation use outputs from planning processes to inform the development of its budget? Yes, we've got 50% said yes. No. I think Costa and I, we've both been involved in organisations and seen where there's been that disconnection. And then finally, does your organisation develop its strategy as a coordinated effort that includes all relevant staff involved in strategy delivery? We have a majority have said yes, which is fantastic. So I'm going to set up 4 new rooms, think rooms. We're going to pop you back into your think room number 2. And I just want you to have a 5-minute discussion with those in your think room about some of these questions.
Welcome back all. Hope you had an opportunity to have some really good, fun conversations in there, and welcome back. So we're going to step into focus area 3 now, and it's going to be all around the importance of bridging the gap between the development of our strategy or formulation of our strategy and how we go about its day-to-day operationalization or its execution. So, which is obviously fundamental to us being resilient organizations. You know, how do we actually take our strategy, the design of it, and actually execute? So we're going to look at a slide here which presents the strategy pyramid. So this is a concept we've put together, and when you think of a strategy like a pyramid, each layer of the pyramid supports the layer above it. And with the strategy, really, there's no shortcuts. We need to take a methodical approach that's step by step, and we need to build it up from the ground. So if we look at the first part of that, just go back to that. So the first part's design. Now, it really underpins how effective we are at delivering that strategy. You know, do we have the right structure? Have we performed that environmental scan that Pete spoke about earlier? Is it orientated correctly? Do we have performance measures in place to tell us that we're on track or not? The next layer of the pyramid that talks about alignment. How are we taking our plan at a strategic level and breaking that down throughout the business? Are there other things that we need to align to as well within our internal context or external context? It could be business activities internally or externally. It could be legislation or standards. Next on the pyramid is enablement. How do we actually take all that design and alignment and give it the fuel that it needs to actually execute the strategy effectively? And at the apex, as you would expect us to see, we have execution. And there's no doubt execution, and I've been involved in different organizations delivering strategy many times. Execution's a hard thing to do. However, if we think about all the steps that we need to take before we get to execution and doing those effectively, there's no doubt execution will be a much simpler task in the end. So we're going to take a deep dive into the first slice of the pyramid, which is design, and the first part of that, which is getting the structure right. So in terms of a structure, there's many methodologies as to what we can that we can use to help us perform that environmental scan to understand what are the things that we need to be looking at to include in our strategy. It could be SWOT analysis or pest analysis, or even surveying our customers. And then taking that information and using a methodology like OKRs or SMART or MBO to help us structure it in a way that it makes sense. So personally at Skefto, we use an OKR system, which is made famous by Intel and then Google. And it gives us a really clean and easy way to structure up our objectives at a high level, and then to break those down into key results that really guide us and give us a purpose and direction as to where we want to be going. The other point is the approach that we've taken, whether it's bottom up or top down, to help us formulate our strategy. And we'll talk about that in more detail later on. The next thing is resources. And I'll speak a fair bit about this throughout today's session. Do we have the right resources financially and non-financially? And how do we go about allocating those? Do we have an integrated planning and budgeting process? And a lot of the people in the poll said yes, they do, which is fantastic. However, if you don't have that, and we've got a traditional model of allocating funds based on the last 12 months to allocate for the next 12 months, how do we go about allocating the right resources to those strategic priorities? So a priority-based funding model, which is a bit more dynamic. The next 2 points I'm going to talk about together, and that's granularity and orientation. So when we think about a strategic plan down to operational plans, at the very highest level, they can't be too granular because they need to provide focus and direction. But as we go down the chain and we look at more operational implementation plans, they need to become a lot more granular, because if they're too high level there, then we're not going to be able to get those particular projects off the ground. People need to be able to relate to them. They've got to be realistic and achievable and very task-based, which leads me into the next point, the orientation. Lower down your planning cycles or your planning process, you're going to have task-based oriented plans. And it's all going to be about delivery success. But then as you go up, as those things scale up or roll back up to your strategic plan, you'll see in your strategic plan a value-based orientation, which talks about outcomes like we want to be the lead software company in the APAC region over the next 3 years. That's a key outcome. We want to deliver the best services and the best products to our consumer base, outcome-based, value-based orientation. But to achieve that, we need to break down those value-based propositions into something that's task-based to allow us to deliver. The next point is how we measure the success of our plans. And when you think about performance measurement, we really need to think about having a nice core set of KPIs that we can relate to, that are relevant, and that are going to really measure what's critical within our business. Have we also thought about how we've aligned those things to our strategy? Do we have key results that are linked to KPIs that are telling us whether we're on track to achieving that result in 2 or 3 years' time? Performance measures probably you want them to be realistic, but you want them to be aspirational as well. And the other thing that I'm going to talk about a fair bit today is having performance measures that are predictive. Can we use the concept of a lead indicator to help us understand potential positive outcomes in the future, but also importantly, negative perceived outcomes that might be occurring? Can we bring that to the fore quickly for those things to not be an issue and for us to be able to make a change as we need to? What they also allow us to do is avoid frantic change and take more control and calm when it comes to delivering our strategy, because we know when things are coming in advance. Now, look, I've been in management positions for the last 15 years of my professional career, and one of the hardest things to do is trying to instill KPIs into a workforce. People just don't like them. None of us like them. However, if used correctly and if getting engagement early enough in the piece, you can certainly use them as a good productivity tool that can motivate people. So if you think about getting people to buy into the development of a KPI, really early in the piece, and you're achieving targets, that makes people feel good. On the flip side of that, if they're bought into it early in the piece as well, even if you're not getting the right results, automatically people are thinking, okay, well, I've bought into this, I've agreed to this, I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to make the adjustment required. And the beauty about a KPI as well, if used correctly or if constructed correctly, it should be quantifiable and it should be time-based, so it gives us purpose and focus. Okay, so we're going to look at a bit of a demonstration on how we can use technology to help us design our strategy and to help us better measure our performance. So I'm going to flip into a tool. I'm going to skip this. This is our tool. So we use this for our own strategy as well. But what you're looking at here is a local government example. So it's a lead local government organisation in Western Australia. This is all publicly available information, but a really good example of how a strategy can be constructed from the top level and then broken down into what we might call sub-plans. So at this community planning level for a local government, they've set it out in a way which maps out a range of strategic goals. Things like being good contributors to society or helping the economy, the environmental side of what a local government organisation should do, and the civic leadership they need to provide. So if I expand society, that might then break down into some key outcomes, such as having healthy and active people in our community. It could be around having safe communities. It could be around having distinctive places that people can go to. And at the next level below that, to achieve those outcomes, we might have specific strategies, such as creating opportunities that encourage community wellbeing or facilitating opportunities with the city to access peak and elite activities. So associated with each outcome, we might then also have some performance measures. And if we look at this one as a starter, community satisfaction with the city's provision of sport and recreation facilities. That's a lead indicator, which might go into the next indicator, which is a lag indicator that talks about total operating income from our recreational facilities. So if we look at that as an example, so we can see that this particular performance measure might be something that we might need to report externally to another government body potentially. It might be subject to a certain data classification, which could be public or it could be restricted or something that we use internally. So various sectors out there would have a requirement to report on a mandatory basis to a regulator. So I know local government in Victoria falls under that category. Now, the aged care sector, they've got various KPIs which are about to increase in number and size. They'll have to report on an annual basis as well. In terms of performance measure, as I mentioned earlier, they should be time-bound. So we need to think about the recurrence or the frequency of how often we need to capture data against the KPI. We need to know how we're measuring it. So this particular one here, which talks about operating income, is measured in the hundreds of millions. And we need to think about what a good and bad or an indifferent result might look like. So what's telling us that we're performing well or substandard or something that's okay. So we're setting up targets here that are going to give us some of those indicators, right away. So if we look at, say, the results that might be recorded over a period of time, we might have recorded 900 million, 950 million, and then something over 100 million with respect to this KPI, giving us red, amber, and green traffic light indicators as we go. What's also very important is being able to provide commentary explaining why you're getting a result or why you're not getting a result, and if you're not, what are you doing about it? So you might want to run a review process. So this is a review on a particular measure that explains the performance within the 2017 to the 2018 financial year period, stating here what the actual targets were, what's been done well. So there's been a 20% uplift in financial performance in comparison to the previous year due to the selling of additional swimming accessories. However, what could we have done better? And that would have been opening a new facility on time, which would have helped us achieve our revenue targets. So providing that commentary and that explanation is very important, because a lot of the time the people reading into those reports, they're not going to know on a day-to-day what's happening with that plan. So the opportunity to provide that commentary is extremely important. So we were looking at structure of plans, and this is a strategic community plan, but when we break down into lower levels of planning, and we might look at this corporate business plan that is associated with the strategic community plan, the actual structure might be different. So we've actually pulled across here some of the strategic goals from the community plan, such as society, a key outcome, which is creating opportunity for the communities. And then under those things, we might have priorities, such as having a capital work sub-program focused on improving our golf courses and community safety and our sporting facilities. Or under this particular outcome of creating opportunities in the community, we might have a priority to support community wellbeing. And under that, we've got things like complete and implement. So we're starting to see more task-based orientation here at the lower level of planning. But when we look back up at the community plan, very much value-based orientation. So I just wanted to show you how you might structure a plan, whether at the top end or breaking down to a business plan or plans below that, with a value-based orientation going down to a task-based orientation that's more granular. Okay. So the next slice of the period we're going to look at is alignment. So when we think about alignment, what are we really talking about? Well, it's pretty simple. It's taking our strat plan and breaking that down into something that's actionable. So taking all those strategic and tactical goals and objectives and connecting those things in. There's different methodologies. There's a top-down approach, which a lot of organizations use. It makes a lot of sense. There's a bottom-up approach, which goes out to, I guess, the people that are working at the coalface that understand probably our customer base better than anyone, and surveying them and understanding what they're doing strategically from an operational sense that we can maybe formulate into our next strategy. Or is it an interactive or a dual level approach where different strategies are forming at different times throughout your organization that you need to bring together at some point in time? And we'll talk a bit about that later on. Really, there's no right or wrong there. Pick the model that works for you. If it's top down or bottom up, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that things come into alignment. So really, what are we trying to do what are we trying to achieve when it comes to alignment? Well, getting everyone moving in the same rhythm. And one of the fundamental elements of that is to have very clear roles and responsibilities in place. The other thing is having transparency and the willingness to share information. So when we think about trying to align with different things happening in the business, well, we can only do that if we know where things sit. If we can't find it, then we can't align to it. So we need to be willing to have a transparent culture and a willingness to share information across the board. Now, the other thing, and this is a bit of a concept of maybe our business performance being the sum of all our staff performance. So if we think about our plans, whether we've got the KPIs linked into them or not, we need to think from a performance measure perspective, how we're connecting the dots between how our business is performing and how staff perform. We need to motivate people through a proactive approach to developing performance measures and using those as a tool for good to motivate people, because there's no doubt, and I believe in that formula, that the sum of our staff performance will equal our business performance. There is no doubt about that. The other thing that we might want to look at as well is other internal facets within our organisation and our external context and how we might align to that. So if we think about internally as an organisation, our business activities, our processes, our business units, we probably want to align the elements of our strategy into those things. So if you think of an aged care facility or an aged care provider, they provide home care services, and we know with the Royal Commission there's been, and with the outcomes from that, there'll be further investment into the delivery of home care that aged care providers will benefit from. So there's no doubt a lot of them are going to be tying or working their strategies through it to provide better home care services because of the increased funding. So how do we align now that increased funding through our strategy to the outcomes that are expected of us as an organisation, as an aged care provider, right? And those requirements are sitting in the quality standards, which leads into the next thing around legislation and standards. So I mentioned in the aged care environment, every industry has a regulator and is regulated in different ways. So how can we strategically build our business to not only grow, but to comply and to align with the different standards and legislation out there? We might also want to think of overarching government strategies. So if we're a state government or a local government organisation, there might be whole of state strategies or federal strategies that we might want to consider and align to, and also linking in with our operating partners. So let's say we are a local government organisation and we're a rural council, and there could be various other organisations such as emergency service providers, the State Emergency Service, the Victorian Police Department or the Police Department in your respective states, or it could be the fire services that we might want to tie our plans into. So that could be a crisis management plan as an example that we might need to trigger at some point in time. So having a correlation between what we're doing and what our operating partners that we might need at times are doing could be beneficial for us as well. Okay, so we're now going to jump back into Skefto and just have a very quick look at how technology can help with strategic alignment. So as I mentioned before, there's different ways that you can align. So again, if we go back up to the strategic community plan, we're going to take a look at, on the left-hand side here, these sub-plans that are basically feeding into the strategic community plan. So effectively what we've done to create these sub-plans is take this community plan that's been developed, which might map out the next 5 or 10 years, and go through a process of creating what we call a sub-plan, which might be, say, a corporate business plan for the next 12 months. So this might be our 2021 to 2022, the business or action plan. There might be a person primarily responsible, so let's call this our CEO. And there might be other people integral to us delivering this particular plan. So we'll say Director of Assets, the Director of Community in Place, and the Director of Planning and Sustainability. And we can give each one of these people specific responsibilities. So let's say I'm going to add council in here as another example, and I'm going to make them the approver. So it needs to be ratified before it's obviously launched. And then the Director of Assets might be, say, a viewer. So they're there for information purposes, but they might not have a direct role. And then maybe this person here is a manager who's got an active role to play. And I'm going to create that sub-plan. So what that then gives me the ability to do is look at my strategic community plan and say, okay, in this particular implementation period, what are going to be my priorities? Well, my priority is going to be around creating opportunities in the community, or it might be 1.1.2 around facilitating opportunities within the city, or it could be around enabling the community to be prepared and recover from emergent situations. So I'm selecting the priority items from our community plan that I want to address within our sub-plan. So it'll bring those items across. And then what we need to do is think about, okay, well, what priorities do we have in place there? So this is around creating communities and the opportunities for the community. So it might be around creating a community hub. And to create the community hub, there might be various actions that we might need to undertake. Well, the first thing we might do is to run a feasibility study. We might survey our community. We might refit building X. as a community center, and so forth. So they're all the things that we're doing at a sub-planning level based on a priority that are feeding back up to an outcome in our strategic plan. So that's the classic case of vertical alignment. So if we think about horizontal alignment and what that actually could mean. So I'm going to go now into a different plan, which is an early childhood strategic plan. So this plan here at the moment is sitting out on its own, but there might be things within this plan that could be feeding other plans. So as an example, I'm going to do a search, just a free text search here based on the keyword for the term programs and services. I'll get my spelling right. And we can see here within the social strategy, there's an objective around creating, around community recreation programs and services. So what I can choose to do is I can click the link button and I can say, okay, well, this priority area 1, we believe will have an impact on our social strategy. So I can then start horizontally linking items across my business. So it doesn't have to just fall from the top down to the bottom in a vertical format. It can go horizontally as well, where you've got different business areas at the same level or across and down that are basically informing others as to how they might be impacting a strategy or how other strategies might be impacting them, and then providing commentary as to how those things might interoperate with each other. So I mentioned earlier the possibility of maybe even aligning to other internal things within our internal context and also items from our external context. So if we look within this early childhood strategic plan here and the first priority around leadership and advocacy, there might be certain things in our internal environment, such as business units, processes, or activities that could relate to this priority area. So it might be around having community and local business support. That's one of our activities. It could be around delivering community services. Again, one of our activities. And it might be delivered by the business unit called Community in Place as a priority. If we look at our external context, it might be having relevant standards, such as the National Quality Framework for Early Childhood Education and Care, and having that information at our fingertips that we can just reference quickly. Or it might be linking in with maybe the state government Department for Education and Training. So if you look at this, this is the Victorian Department for Education and Training. And if you look at their strategic plan, there's a whole section on early childhood education. So it's pretty likely that there's going to be things within our plan as a local government organisation and a specific part of our planning focused on early childhood that might interlink with what the State Government Department for Education and Training is doing. So just a bit of a view on ways to link, looking internally, but also externally as well. Okay, so we're now just going to jump back into the presentation and we're going to have a look at, again, a couple of examples of the good, the bad and the ugly, good examples of strategy gone right and then gone wrong. So let's take Yahoo, and everyone's going to know these organizations. They were absolute leaders at different points in time in their respective industries. But as we know, they've both realized a very different fate. So if we take Yahoo, and again, if you look at that mission statement, it's not too bad. It's, to me, pretty focused. But I don't believe they actually stuck to that because they diversified it quite a bit. And look, one of the first things they actually did, which was a major fault in their strategic planning or the strategic decision making, was to actually outsource their search engine to Google. So they tried to become a leader in the search space and outsourced a critical component being their search engine to Google, their major competitor. As we know, Google took over in the late 90s and became the powerhouse in that space. So in terms of Yahoo and sort of what they did after that point in time, as I mentioned, they're diversified. So if you think about all the tech giants today, there's one thing that they can call that's theirs that they do better than anyone. So if you think about LinkedIn and Facebook, they've got their social channels. If you think about in the e-commerce space, you've got the likes of eBay and you've got Amazon and then you've got Google in the search space. Yahoo tried to become a giant in a lot of different areas, all those different areas, without having a solid core, one thing they could call their own, and they did better than anyone else. With respect to Yahoo, one thing led to the next. They rejected an offer from Microsoft, which could have been their salvation, really, of $50 billion. That was back in 2008. And then they ineffectively tried to expand into mobile. They cut costs when it came to employees and innovation, and it was just one spiraling thing that led to the next. On the flip side of that, Xero is an interesting case study. And the reason they're interesting is because they came into an industry that was really established and was led by some key players. And those players were the likes of MyOb and QuickBooks. So they were dominant in that industry, and no one probably thought at that time anyone could touch them. But what Xero did is they saw an opportunity, and the opportunity was cloud computing. And they built the first, and probably the best still to today, cloud computing software platform that focused on accounting and finance. And their strategy was very specific. We were just going to focus on accounting and finance. The customer strategy was also very specific. They were actually going to target SMEs, and they were going to channel that through accounting practices. In terms of the way they expanded their business, again, extremely specific. They had a concept called follow the crown, which they used to underpin all their marketing expansion strategies. And that was to actually target countries that were Commonwealth based, that they knew were going to be quite similar to the way they operated in New Zealand and Australia. They had 9 performance metrics at their top level, 9, that's it. They didn't have 20 or 50 or 100. They were very specific as to what was going to tell them if they were performing well as an organisation and if they weren't. They also simplified their organisation for global expansion to get their operating model right. And I'm going to talk about that later as well. And they put their customers at the centre of all their operations, adopting a flywheel model where all their activities, whether it be sales, marketing, or service, are revolved around their customers. So 2 examples of organisations that had the world at their fingertips, one that's taken an opportunity and done a great job in capitalising on it, and Yahoo, really, who's become quite minor in the search world when you compare them to the other giants out there today. Okay, before we go into a breakout room, we're quickly going to look at the things that we need, to become a resilient organisation. So the enablers that are going to help us execute our strategy effectively. So the first thing is people, and people is probably the most important part to us becoming, truly resilient through the delivery of strategy. So when we think about people, we've got to think about, do we have enough people? Do we have the right people? Are they skilled? And do we have the management structure in place that's going to help us deliver that strategy? And if you think again of the different tiers of strategy, strategic plan, operational, team plan, and so forth, we need a management structure in place that's going to support that. The other thing is technology. We're in a tech world, there's no doubt about that. Do we have the right data at our fingertips to make the smart, informed business decisions? And do we have that information accessible at the right time? Do we have to go look in a filing cabinet? Pete mentioned earlier, a lot of people are still working on spreadsheets. That's one step in the right direction. It's not paper-based, but it's hard to find. We need smarter systems to be able to get the information and be more accessible. And do we need tools and technology to help us execute? It could be CRM systems or marketing automation systems, policy libraries and so forth. Depending on our sector, we might have a emphasis on having really robust policies and procedures. So again, if you think about government or any large organisation, we'll need a process around how we go about our strategic planning. And no doubt, strategic planning or strategy development of a strategy is a creative process, but to put that into execution, we need a solid process around it. Aside from that, if you're a regulated organisation, is to report on the progress of their plan or their KPIs. Having systems around collating data, assuring data, certifying data, for eventual auditing is obviously fundamental. The next point, and maybe the second most important point on this slide past people, is having the right operating model. So do we have an operating model in our business today that's truly adaptive to change and allows us to embrace change? So when we think about a strategy, there's no doubt that every strategy will bring forward change. We need to be ready as an organisation to understand what we need to deliver and how we're going to deliver that. And setting up our operating model in a way that's going to create the right value chains for our customers and all the things around it, right, that's going to allow us to deliver that strategy. One thing to note as well is that the operating model, it is different from a business model. A business model will look at things like revenue and cost and sustainability, and operating models, how we deliver value to our customers. And the last point, and I won't spend too long on this one, again, just getting that budgeting right. Are we going to integrate our outputs from a strategic planning process into our budget, or do we take more of a dynamic approach? It doesn't matter what, but just make sure there's a point in the process where you can allocate the right budget. Okay, so very quickly, just looking at how we can use technology to help us with resource planning. So if we jump back into Skefto again, we'll look at our capital work sub-program here in our business plan, our annual business plan, and there might be an item in here around improving our golf courses. So this is a capital works program, and if we open that, we can see period on period what resources we've allocated and the resources that we've actually, and the cost that we've drawn down on that budget. So we can see we allocated about 2 million back in 2018, 2019, and we used all that. You know, up until the current year, we allocated and had approved 800,000, and we've drawn down 400,000 of that. So you can use all this information to help you plan around what you need from a budgeting perspective, and also determine what those resources are, the budget, the cost, and really important, how critical are they to us actually achieving our strategy or achieving a particular outcome. So that's what we're talking about here in terms of criticality of a particular resource. And there might be other ways that you classify your resources as well that make sense to your organization. So in terms of how you might surface that, you know, in a reporting perspective, you might look at a dashboard that shows you our total budget versus our total cost for a particular strategy rollout, how many things are on budget or not. And if you want to go more granular, you could look at things like item by item. Again, what does our budget look like versus our cost, with the traffic light indicator telling us we're over budget, within budget, or well below budget. So initially, this could be used as a tool to help you build budget around your strategic initiatives, but absolutely as a tool, technology could be used as a tool to help you draw down on how far you are through expending a particular budget as well. So whilst I'm on the reporting, just quickly flicking back to performance measures, which is one of the first things that we looked at in Skefto. So as I said, you know, associating performance measures with the achievement of the plan is important. So these are various KPIs that you can see in a tool that give you a trend period on period as to what your expectations are in terms of performance against your thresholds or your tolerances, and how you're performing in relation to a previous period as well. So if you wanted to see that in a broad sense, you could look at things like, out of all our performance metrics today, how many don't we have a gauge on? So unrate is probably the place that we don't want to be because it's a big black hole. And how many are performing well and how many are performing not so well. So using technology to be able to surface information, very, very important. Okay, so we're going to get back into a think room. So Pete, if you could just bring up the next set of questions here to raise, just to run those polls, and just take some time to think about and respond to these questions. And yeah, we're going to break out again into the think rooms, and yeah, see you back here again after you guys have those conversations. So yeah, take your time to just work through these questions, and Pete, I'm assuming you'll allocate the same amount of time as last. So
Will do. So we'll give everyone a chance to cast their vote, and then we'll open up the think room. All right, let's check out some poll results. I'll end the poll now. And I'll share the results with everyone. So we have, does your organisation effectively bridge the gap between strategy development and its practical day-to-day execution? We have majority have said yes. Does your organisation tie performance measures to the achievement of goals and delivery key projects? Again, majority have said yes. And does your organisation communicate progress of plans upstream, downstream, and across divisionally, and update plans as required? And we've got a higher percentage saying no, we don't. So with that in mind, we're going to pop you back into your think room. We'll only give you 4 minutes this time, and just have a brief discussion about those poll results. So I'll create 4 new rooms and I'll open them up in just one moment. I'll open those now.
okay, so everyone's back. All right, fantastic. So again, I hope you had some good conversation in the room. So look, we are running out of time, so I'm going to go through the next section in a bit more speed than the last one. So look, this next focus area talks about strategic agility and why it's so important for us to be agile to ensure that we can become resilient organisations. So if we just cast our minds back to the strategy pyramid that we looked at earlier today, this methodology here for delivering strategy, it's really akin to, say, and I'm not sure if you've all heard about it, the waterfall approach. And there's definitely a benefit in a waterfall approach to delivering projects and strategy these days. And if you think about physical projects like, building a bridge, absolutely relevant. But when it comes to things that are less physical, there's no doubt taking a strategic approach could be really beneficial. So if we convert this pyramid here into what it might look like as an agile strategy pyramid, it gives us the ability to go up and down that pyramid from design through to execution and everything in between in a recursive format. So let's go back and rethink what we need from a design perspective to get us better outcomes when we come to execution and everything in between that. So the next slide here then looks at a typical process for execution of Agile called Scrum. So a lot of you will probably have heard of this. And it really, the first thing that we start with when it comes to this process is distilling our ideas into what we call a backlog. And the backlog from a tech perspective is called a product backlog, but in a strategy context, we call it strategy backlog. The next step is really taking those items from that backlog and going through a planning process. So what resources do we need? How long are things going to take? And the best outcomes there are typically achieved when you get all your teams together with your owners, your strategy owners that you can see at the top there, and work towards those estimates together. And the estimates are absolutely critical. And the reason they're critical is because incrementally, we bring items from the strategy backlog into what we call a sprint backlog. And the sprint backlog will then form a sprint, which is time bound. So let's say for operational activities, you might run a sprint that's 1 to 4 weeks. However, when you look at it at the strategic planning level, you might want to run a sprint that's, say, every 2 months or every 3 months. It reviews your strategy on a longer cycle. So it's important that you get those sprint cycles right, relevant to the specific type of strategy that you're running, whether it's an operational one or a strategic one. At the end of the process, you've got a review and a retrospective that allows you to take a pause and understand what's working and what's not, and feeding new ideas or an adjustment back into your backlog. Okay, so the next slide then talks about what do we actually need to be agile? Well, when you think about the different things that we need, the first thing really is having an assignment of responsibility. So it's not easy to assign responsibility. If you think about a strategy session, you're going to have people really excited that want to take everything on board, and you're going to have other people that call themselves ideas people that don't want to take anything but just provide ideas. We need to understand, what people can deliver, allocate people to the things they're going to excel in. So let's understand their strengths and weaknesses. And the other side to that is understanding people's styles. Can we bring people together? And these days, collaboration is so important that are going to get the best out of each other. And as managers and leaders, we shouldn't be scared to jump into the trenches and get our hands dirty and lead from the middle, right? Lead from the middle in a way that's going to motivate people to let them know that we're going to be there every step of the way. Do we have access to the right data? And is that data coming to us real time without us having to go and search for it? Accessibility is a key thing. Do we have the right systems around reporting and analytics, both internal and external reporting? The next point is really important, taking that review process. So if you think of a strategy like a basketball game, not having quarter time breaks and not having timeouts within a quarter means that we don't have the opportunity to review what's working and what's not and make the changes we need to. And the question around how long we should spend on a review process probably also depends on the type of strategy or the level of plan that we're working with. So a strategic plan, you might want to review, say, in a 4 to 8 hour block. So let's allocate a whole day because we do it once every 3 months. But if it's an operational plan, well, that's probably too long. Maybe we allocate 30 minutes to something like that. The next point is around collaboration. And collaboration, again, is extremely important these days as more teams are coming together, both in face and remote, to deliver things. And it's not around just having a coffee or having a chat with someone. It's around setting up the right means of communicating within a team to deliver your strategy. And not only doing that internally, but doing that externally. Are we talking to other stakeholders? Are we talking to our customers? And remember, a lot of the time, the reason we're building a new strategy is to produce better outcomes for our customers. It's going to produce better outcomes for our organization. I won't talk too much about this, but again, I'm going to focus on the lead side of our performance measurements. Let's try and use lead indicators as much as possible to understand where we are anticipating a positive result or a non-positive result, in which case we might want to pivot. Also, and Pete mentioned this earlier, do we have the right approach to manage our risks, opportunities, and issues? Having a framework in place that allows us to understand our tolerances. Sure, we want to deliver a strategy, we're excited, but we don't want to do things outside of our tolerance. We don't want to break the walls of the dam and be uncomfortable with where things are sitting. But on the flip side, understanding our appetite. Can we increase our risk to seize an opportunity? And the last thing we need here, and I spoke about it earlier, change management. Are we truly set up in a way that's going to allow us to embrace change and to deliver a strategy? So organizational change management is critically important. And to be honest with you, it's probably one of the biggest risks when it comes to ineffective strategy execution, is having that disconnect between the strategy and our ability to deliver it. So when we think of ourselves as responsible parties in the delivery of a strategy or in the design of a strategy or managing people that are working to a strategy, we're ambassadors for change. We're there to drive change. There's many models available when it comes to change management, operational change management. I'm not sure if you've heard of Kurt Lewin, but he's a psychologist and he's very focused on the psychology of change. So Kurt Lewin's principle is the first thing we need to do is unfreeze our thoughts, which is very hard to do. Easy in theory, hard in practice because we're creatures of habit. So we need to unfreeze the way we've been doing things for the last 3 to 5 years in that planning cycle and think about things differently. That's going to formulate our strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. So once we've done that to a certain level, we can start incrementally applying change. And as we do that, we want to start increasing the frequency of change and the size of the change up until a point where we've got a critical mass where we can refreeze our thoughts and drive the next 3 to 5 year strategy. The next is John Kotter. And John Kotter, look, the outcome is very similar. Change is change and we're there to drive it, to try to help us deliver a new strategy. But John Kotter, he's got a different background as a professor in leadership, and he's got a pragmatic 8-step approach to institute change. The first thing, and it makes a lot of sense, create urgency. Why do you actually need to make a change? And if we don't do it, what does it mean for our organization? Then we need to form a coalition through a solid vision. We need to communicate it, steps 2 to 4. We need to get support behind us that's going to help us drive that message. It could be the best message. If it's only us believing in it, then it's not going to go anywhere. We need to remove obstacles, and by doing that, creating small and short-term wins. And from that point on, Kotter and Lewin's processes are fairly similar. Create those small wins, accelerate the frequency of those wins, and sustain them to truly be able to institute change. So 2 different models of change management are critically important. It doesn't matter which model you use, but we need to remember that every strategy will bring about change. So we need to set up our organizations and our operating models to really embrace that. Okay, look, we haven't got a lot more time left, so I'm just going to very quickly go back into Skefto and just quickly show you an example of what it might look like to take a range of items across a range of plans and put into a sprint for execution. So you're looking at here a task-based dashboard, very much focused on tasks and things we need to do. And these are all emanating from various plans and have formed a 2-month sprint. So we can see here the dates here are from the 1st of May to the 30th of June. And there's activities across different plans that might be the responsibility of the person logged in or their teams. So we can see that it might be the business plan that we might need to review, or it could be actions that we need to complete, or if I scroll down, it might be performance measures that we might need to enter results against or report on. So either way, we're taking all that planning information and we're bringing it into a cycle of time known as a sprint in the agile world that we're then going to be focused on executing. The other thing that's really important here is that everything's time bound. You can see there's time frames on everything and there's responsible people associated with everything, which could be an individual, such as a CEO, or multiple people working together on something, which in this case is a review. Okay, so we're not going to go into another breakout room because we're running out of time, but I'm just going to get Pete to just present the next poll, just to get your feedback on these 2 questions before we go into the last couple of slides prior to conclusion. So Pete, if you can just put the next poll up, please.
And let's share some results. So does your organisation reallocate resources and apply corrective action when plans change or risk and opportunities are identified? Majority are unsure. Do you think failures in strategy, design and execution would likely impact your organisation's financial performance? And we have 100% on that one.
All right, thanks for that, Pete. So look, coming into the second last slide here, and in the last slide I spoke about change management and why it's and what we need to do to embrace it. So why is it important? So really, when you think about our strategy, it's mostly influenced by our top level strategy, influenced by threats, strategic threats and strategic opportunities. The thing about these threats and opportunities is that they're not often convenient for us. They come suddenly, they're unpredictable, and a lot of the time they're going to make us resort to a radical change in the way we're operating as a business. So we need to be set up in a way that can take those things on board and respond well. And if you think back to the Yahoo and the Xero example, one organization that didn't respond well to a threat and has become irrelevant almost today, and the other one that's seen an opportunity and really flourished from it. So the other thing agility gives us in an agile approach is the ability to learn and improve. So as I mentioned earlier, in the IT world, it's commonly used. It gives us the ability, and there's a concept called the lean startup. And even if you look at a large organization, it's an organization built up of many smaller teams. Those teams need to be lean. They've only got certain resources available to them. They need to be lean and they need to understand where they're succeeding. And if you're not succeeding, they fail fast and they make a pivot. That way they can continuously innovate. And that ties into what Pete was talking about earlier today in terms of that cycle of innovation through to operationalizing your strategy. So it gives us the ability to learn from the past, act now, because we only work in the present, that can hopefully alter our course for the future. And the last thing it gives us is the ability to combine our strategies. And the large organizations, and there's people here today representing large organizations, you will know that there's strategies that could be forming even unknown to yourselves, and you being the heads of strategy or heads of planning. So if you take a university as an example, you might have in different research areas plans forming there, or you might have the student union developing a particular plan. But we're now developing a new 5-year strategy for the university. And whilst we don't want to stifle those plans because they're really important for our organization, that could be very innovative, we want to bring them back into alignment to make sure that they are fitting in with our purpose and with our core values and our guiding principles. So at the last slide, we're going to cast back to the very first slide, just looking at this cross section between resilience, strategy, and risk and opportunity management. And initially we presented this as a Venn diagram, but as we've researched over the last few months and over the last few years, really myself, I thought of a different representation of how it all fits, and thinking about resilience being the outer shell of our business, and then having a range of strategies within our business that help us manage a range of risks, opportunities, and issues. And then circulating around our organization are these strategic risks and strategic opportunities that we can either take on board and respond to and prosper from, or if we don't respond to correctly, could definitely lead to our demise and lead to us becoming irrelevant organizations moving forward. So it's a thought, it's an opinion. I'm not sure how it relates to everyone, but something to think about. So with that, I'd like to thank you for attending today's masterclass. And we probably don't have time for any questions, but we are happy to take them if you want to hang around. If you can't hang around, feel free to email them through, and we're happy to respond as they come through via email as well. So thank you all for your attendance today and your participation. We hope it was really valuable.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been a great session. Thanks to Costa for some really amazing insights to the strategy world and how you can apply that in your own organization. So as Costa said, we're happy to hang around if you've got any questions, but if you have to go again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.